The bulldozer's engine roared to life as Sarah Martinez stood defiantly in her backyard, tears streaming down her face. Across the fence, Karen Whitmore clutched a folder of legal documents, her perfectly manicured nails digging crescents into the manila envelope. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed," Karen hissed, her voice barely audible over the machinery. But Sarah had already discovered the truth buried in those city planning records, the same truth that would shatter Karen's picture-perfect facade and expose the dark secret she'd been hiding beneath Maple Street's pristine exterior. Some pools hold more than water. Some hold lies that run deeper than anyone imagined. The demolition crew arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, just as Sarah Martinez had requested. She stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in her hands, watching the workers unload their equipment with mechanical precision. The sight of the excavator backing toward her beloved swimming pool sent a sharp pain through her chest, but she'd made her choice. After 18 months of fighting, 18 months of legal bills that had drained their savings, 18 months of watching her daughter Emma grow quieter and more withdrawn, this was the only way forward. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Emma's voice cracked behind her. At 16, her daughter had spent countless summers in that pool, birthday parties, sleepovers, quiet afternoons reading poolside while Sarah tended her garden. Now Emma's eyes held the same exhausted defeat that Sarah felt in her bones. "We don't have a choice anymore, sweetheart." Sarah turned from the window, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. Sometimes you have to tear something down to build something better. But even as she said the words, Sarah knew they rang hollow. There would be no building something better. The legal fees had seen to that. Karen Whitmore and her relentless campaign to have the pool declared a neighborhood hazard had succeeded in ways that went far beyond simple removal. The doorbell's chime cut through the morning air like a blade. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew exactly who would be standing on her front porch at this hour, and it wasn't a friendly neighbor offering moral support. Karen Whitmore stood ramrod, straight on the welcome mat, her silver hair styled in the same immaculate bob she'd worn for the past decade. Her pale blue eyes, the same shade as the pool water that would soon be nothing but a memory, held their usual mixture of righteous indignation and barely concealed satisfaction. She clutched a leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. "Sarah." Karen's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I trust you received my attorney's final correspondence regarding the property line dispute. The pool is coming down, Karen. You won." Sarah's voice came out rougher than she intended. She hadn't slept in 3 days, not since the judge's final ruling. "What more do you want?" Karen's thin lips curved into what might have charitably been called a smile. "I want to ensure this unpleasantness is handled properly. There are protocols to follow, permits to verify, safety regulations to consider." She opened her portfolio with practiced efficiency. "I've taken the liberty of researching the proper procedures for pool removal. The city requires. I know what the city requires." Sarah's patience, already stretched to its breaking point, finally snapped. "I've been dealing with city officials for over a year, thanks to your constant complaints. Every permit has been filed. Every regulation has been followed. Every I has been dotted and every T has been crossed, just like you demanded." The excavator's engine roared to life behind them, drowning out Karen's response. Both women turned to watch as the massive machine positioned itself at the pool's edge. The operator, a weathered man in his 50s, caught Sarah's eye and raised his hand in a questioning gesture. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Wait." Karen's composure cracked for the first time. "You can't just. The noise ordinance doesn't permit heavy machinery before 8 a.m. on weekends. It's Tuesday, Karen, and it's 7:30. Sarah stepped aside as the excavator's bucket descended toward the crystal-clear water. "Your war is over." The first impact sent a shower of tile and concrete flying. Emma gasped behind them, and Sarah felt her daughter's hand slip into hers. The pool that had been the centerpiece of their backyard, the gathering place for family memories, the sanctuary where Emma had learned to swim, began to die under the relentless assault of progress and neighborhood politics. Karen watched the destruction with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, certainly, but something else lurked beneath the surface. Something that looked almost like guilt? "You know," Karen said quietly, her voice nearly lost under the machinery's roar, "this could have been resolved differently. If you had just been reasonable from the beginning, Reasonable. Sarah whirled to face her. You called the city 14 times in 6 months. You filed noise complaints every time Emma had friends over. You tried to have our homeowner's insurance cancelled by claiming the pool was an attractive nuisance. You made our lives hell, Karen. All because you decided our pool was somehow ruining your perfect little world. Property values. This was never about property values, and we both know it. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper, but her words carried the weight of accumulated rage. This was about control. This was about making sure everyone on Maple Street lives exactly the way Karen Whitmore thinks they should live. The excavator. Bucket struck the pool's bottom with a thunderous crack that echoed through the neighborhood. Several windows opened along the street as curious neighbors emerged to witness the spectacle. Sarah noticed Mrs. Chen from next door shaking her head sadly, and the Johnsons from across the street standing on their porch with expressions of obvious sympathy. Look around, Karen. Sarah gestured toward the growing crowd of onlookers. Look. At their faces. Do you see support? Do you see gratitude for your efforts to protect the neighborhood? Or do you see people who are wondering when you'll come for them next? Karen's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. Sarah pulled a folded document from her pocket, one of many she'd accumulated during her legal research. Did you know that in the past 5 years, you've filed complaints against every single family on the street? The Patel's garden shed was improperly positioned. The Morrison's fence was non-regulation height. The Chen's decorative wind chimes created noise pollution. You've turned neighborhood watch into neighborhood warfare. The color drained from Karen's face. She glanced around at the watching neighbors, suddenly aware that their conversation had an audience. Several of the onlookers exchanged meaningful looks, and Sarah realized she wasn't the only one who had done her research. I was protecting. You were protecting nothing but your own need to control everything around you. Sarah's voice carried clearly across the yard. And now you've gotten what you wanted. Our pool is gone. Our savings are gone. My daughter's safe space is gone. I hope it was worth it. The excavator operator shut down his machine and climbed down to inspect his work. Half the pool lay in ruins, a jagged wound in the earth filled with murky water and debris. He caught Sarah's attention and held up 5 fingers, then made a circular motion. 5 more minutes, and the destruction would be complete. Karen straightened her shoulders, her composure reassembling itself like armor. The Neighborhood Association will be reviewing all pool installations going forward. We can't allow this kind of disruption to happen again. There is no neighborhood association, Karen. The voice came from behind them, crisp and authoritative. Sarah turned to see Margaret Stevens, the elderly woman who lived at the end of the block, approaching with a manila folder of her own. At 78, Margaret had lived on Maple Street longer than anyone else, and her word carried weight that even Karen couldn't ignore. I beg your pardon. Karen's voice climbed an octave. Margaret smiled, but it held no warmth. I said there is no neighborhood association. Oh, you've certainly tried to create one. You've sent letters, held meetings that nobody attended, and appointed yourself to positions that don't exist. But legally, officially, there is no Maple Street Neighborhood Association. I checked with the city clerk's office myself. Karen's portfolio slipped slightly in her grasp. That's not. I have documentation. You have letters you sent to yourself, Karen. Meeting minutes from meetings you held alone in your living room. Bylaws you wrote for an organization that exists only in your imagination. Margaret opened her folder and pulled out a sheet of official city letterhead. This is a certified statement from the Municipal Records Department. There has never been a formal neighborhood association registered for this street. The watching neighbors began to murmur among themselves. Sarah caught fragments of conversation, words like fake and crazy and I knew it, and realized that Karen's carefully constructed authority was crumbling in real time. Furthermore, Margaret continued, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent as a high school principal, I've been researching property records, and I've discovered something quite interesting about your complaints regarding Sarah's pool. Karen went very still. What kind of research? The kind that reveals your own pool permit from 1987 was never properly filed with the city. The kind that show. 3 days after Karen's public humiliation, Sarah received the estimate she'd been dreading. The pool repair contractor, A soft-spoken man named Rodriguez, who'd been in business for 20 years, had delivered his assessment with obvious sympathy. $12,000, he said, sliding the detailed breakdown across Sarah's kitchen table. That's assuming we can salvage the filtration system. If the concrete damage goes deeper than it appears, we are looking at closer to 15. Sarah stared at the numbers until they blurred. Even with Karen's promise to pay for repairs, $12,000 might as well have been $12 million. Their credit was maxed, their savings depleted, and David's construction business was still recovering from the economic downturn that had started this whole nightmare. Mom. Emma hovered in the doorway, backpack slung over her shoulder, keys jingling in her hand. I'm heading to school. Will you be okay? Sarah forced a smile. Of course, sweetheart. Just boring adult stuff. But as Emma's car pulled out of the driveway, Sarah allowed her facade to crumble. She buried her face in her hands and let the tears come. Tears of exhaustion, frustration, and the growing realization that Karen's promise might be worthless. What legal recourse did she have if Karen simply refused to pay? Another lawsuit? More legal fees they couldn't afford? The doorbell's chime made her jump. Through the front window, she glimpsed a familiar silver bob and felt her stomach drop. Karen stood on the porch again, but this time she wasn't alone. A tall man in an expensive suit stood beside her, briefcase in hand, expression professionally neutral. Sarah wiped her eyes and opened the door. Karen. Sarah. Karen's voice held none of yesterday's defeat. If anything, she seemed energized, her pale eyes bright with something that might have been excitement. This is my attorney, Robert Carlyle. We need to discuss the terms of our agreement. Carlyle stepped forward with practiced smoothness. Mrs. Martinez, I understand you and my client reached a verbal agreement regarding property damage compensation. I'm here to formalize those terms in writing. That's good. Sarah tried to read the atmosphere, but something felt wrong. Karen's body language was too confident, too composed. This wasn't the broken woman who'd walked away in defeat 3 days ago. Please, come in. They settled in the living room, Carlyle arranging papers on the coffee table with meticulous precision. Karen perched on the edge of the sofa like a cat preparing to pounce, her earlier humiliations seemingly forgotten. Now then, Carlyle began, my client is prepared to honor her commitment to compensate you for the pool damage. However, there are certain conditions that must be met. Sarah's radar went up immediately. Conditions? She agreed to pay for repairs. Period. There were no conditions discussed. But that's where things become interesting. Carlyle produced a document from his briefcase. You see, Mrs. Martinez, my client's willingness to pay is contingent upon your agreement to certain behavioral modifications. Behavioral modifications. Sarah's voice climbed an octave. What the hell does that mean? Karen leaned forward, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the predator that had been hiding beneath yesterday's defeated exterior. It means, dear, that if you want me to pay for your pool repairs, you'll need to agree to some reasonable neighborhood standards. Carlyle began reading from his document. The homeowner agrees to maintain pool area noise levels below 50 decibels during evening hours. The homeowner agrees to limit pool parties to no more than 6 guests at any given time. The homeowner agrees to install privacy screening to shield neighboring properties from pool activities. The homeowner agrees to submit all future home improvement plans to neighborhood review before beginning construction. This is insane. Sarah shot to her feet. You can't impose those kinds of restrictions on my property. We don't even have a neighborhood association. Margaret proved that 3 days ago. Actually, Karen's smile was razor sharp. We do now. I filed the proper paperwork with the city on Monday. The Maple Street Neighborhood Improvement Association is now officially recognized, with myself as the duly elected president. Sarah stared at her in disbelief. Elected by who? You can't elect yourself to run an association nobody else joined. I can, and I did. Karen produced another document. According to city regulations, a neighborhood association can be formed by any resident willing to take on the administrative responsibilities. Elections are only required when multiple candidates declare their intention to run for officer positions. Since I was the only candidate, I won by default. Carlyle nodded approvingly. All perfectly legal, I assure you. And as president of. A recognized neighborhood association, my client has the authority to establish reasonable community standards. This is blackmail, Sarah said flatly. This is compromise, Karen corrected. You get your pool repaired, and the neighborhood get some much-needed structure and oversight. Everyone wins. Sarah looked down at the contract, scanning the dense legal language. The restrictions were even more onerous than Carlisle had outlined. Noise monitoring devices, mandatory landscaping standards, required approval for any outdoor gathering of more than 4 people, regular property inspections to ensure compliance. And if I refuse to sign? Karen's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Then I'm afraid our verbal agreement becomes null and void. No repairs, no compensation. And of course, as association president, I'll need to investigate the various code violations I've noticed around your property. What code violations? Carlisle pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be dozens of photographs. Improper storage of construction materials in the driveway. Landscaping that exceeds allowable height limits. A mailbox that doesn't conform to neighborhood standards. Oh, and there's the matter of your daughter's car. What about Emma's car? Commercial vehicles aren't permitted in residential driveways overnight, Karen said smoothly. Her car has MIA's pizza decals on it. That makes it a commercial vehicle. Sarah's blood began to boil. She works part-time delivering pizza to help pay for college. Those are magnetic signs she removes when she's not working. Nevertheless, the association has photographic evidence of commercial signage in a residential zone. The fines could be quite substantial. The room fell silent except for the tick of the mantel clock. Sarah looked from Karen's satisfied expression to Carlisle's professional neutrality, understanding with crystal clarity that she'd been played. Karen hadn't been defeated 3 days ago. She'd been planning. You've been watching us, Sarah said quietly, taking pictures, documenting everything, waiting for your chance to strike back. I've been protecting the neighborhood, Karen replied. It's what I do. Sarah walked to the window and stared out at her half-destroyed pool. The excavator was gone, but the gaping wound in her backyard remained, filled with stagnant water and debris, a monument to her miscalculation. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours, Carlisle said. After that, the association will proceed with filing formal complaints with the city. After they left, Sarah sat alone in her living room. The contract spread before her like a death sentence. Every clause was designed to turn her home into a museum, her family into subjects under Karen's microscopic scrutiny. But the alternative, facing code enforcement, potential fines, and no pool repairs, seemed equally impossible. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. How did the estimate meeting go? She couldn't bear to tell him about Karen's ambush. Not yet. Instead, she typed back, still processing everything. Talk tonight. By evening, word of Karen's power play had spread through the neighborhood with the speed of suburban wildfire. Margaret Stevens was the first to call, her voice tight with outrage. That woman has lost her mind, Margaret said without preamble. Creating a fake association to blackmail you into submission? There has to be something illegal about this. Apparently not, Sarah replied, slumped on her couch with the contract still haunting her coffee table. Her lawyer seemed pretty confident about the legality. Lawyers can make anything sound legal. That doesn't make it right. Margaret paused. Sarah, there's something else you should know. Karen's been making rounds to other neighbors, trying to recruit people for her association. She's offering incentives. What kind of incentives? Property improvement grants, funded by association dues, of course. $500 to fix landscaping that meets her standards. $1,000 for approved home improvements. She's essentially bribing people to join her little empire. Sarah closed her eyes. Please tell me people are saying no. Margaret's silence told her everything she needed to know. The Johnsons are considering it, Margaret finally admitted. Their roof needs work, and $1,000 would help. The new family on Elm, the Garcias, they don't understand the history here. To them, Karen sounds like someone trying to improve property values. So she's building an actual power base. It appears so. Sarah, I think you need to understand something. This isn't just about your pool anymore. Karen is using your situation as a proof of concept. If she can break you, force you to submit to her authority, she can do it to anyone. After Margaret hung up, Sarah sat in the gathering darkness, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like lead. She'd thought this was a purr. Sarah woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of multiple vehicles pulling into her driveway. Through her bedroom window, she could see a news van from Channel 7, a police cruiser, and what appeared to be a city inspector's vehicle. Her phone was buzzing with missed calls, 17 from unknown numbers, 3 from Margaret Stevens, and 1 from David. She grabbed her robe and rushed downstairs, finding Emma already at the front window, still in her pajamas, staring out at the growing crowd. "Mom, there are reporters out there. And police. What's happening?" Before Sarah could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Detective Ray Morrison, a middle-aged black man she recognized from neighborhood watch meetings. His expression was serious but not hostile. "Mrs. Martinez? I'm Detective Morrison, Metro PD. We need to speak with you about some allegations that were made last night." Sarah's blood turned to ice. What kind of allegations? It would be better if we discussed this privately. May I come in? Sarah opened the door, acutely aware of the news cameras capturing every moment. Morrison stepped inside, followed by a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Janet Reeves from the city attorney's office. "Mrs. Martinez," Reeves began, "we received a formal complaint last night alleging that you've been harassing a neighbor, Karen Whitmore, and that you've obtained private documents through illegal means. We are here to investigate these claims." Emma stepped protectively closer to her mother. "That's insane. Karen's the one who's been harassing us for over a year." "I understand this is a complex situation," Morrison said diplomatically. "But we have to investigate all allegations. Mrs. Whitmore claims you threatened to release private information about her unless she agreed to certain demands. In legal terms, that's called extortion." Sarah felt the room spin slightly. She filed charges against me. "She's considering it," Reeves said. "Right now, we are in the fact-finding stage. But I should inform you that if formal charges are filed, you could be looking at felony extortion charges." Through the front window, Sarah could see more news vans arriving. A reporter was setting up in front of Karen's house, where Karen herself stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, wearing a crisp white blouse and navy blazer, speaking earnestly into a microphone. "Turn on Channel 7, Emma said, grabbing the remote. The living room filled with the voice of morning anchor Jennifer Walsh, exclusive interview with Karen Whitmore, president of the newly formed Maple Street Neighborhood Improvement Association, who claims she's been the victim of a systematic harassment campaign. Karen's face filled the screen, her expression a masterpiece of wounded dignity. "I've lived on this street for 32 years, she was saying, "and I've always tried to be a good neighbor, to maintain standards that benefit everyone. But some people see any attempt at community improvement as an attack on their personal freedom. Can you tell us about the specific threats you received?" Walsh prompted. "Last night, my neighbor called and threatened to destroy my reputation with false information unless I agreed to her demands. She wanted me to dissolve the neighborhood association I worked so hard to create, and to pay for property damage that wasn't my responsibility. When I refused to be blackmailed, she became verbally abusive." Sarah stared at the screen in horror. Every word was technically true, but twisted beyond recognition. Karen had turned herself into the victim and Sarah into the aggressor with surgical precision. "Mrs. Martinez," Morrison said gently, "I need to ask, do you have any documentation regarding Mrs. Whitmore that you obtained through unofficial channels?" Sarah looked at Emma, then at the files still spread across her coffee table. Her nuclear option had become a nuclear bomb, and Karen had just thrown it back at her. "Detective, I think you need to understand the full context here." Sarah walked to her filing cabinet. "Yes, I have documentation about Karen Whitmore. But I obtained it through completely legal means, public records, city filings, contractor reports. And what it reveals is far more serious than anything she's accusing me of." Reeves frowned. "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled out the aerial photograph showing Karen's pool built on the neighbor's property. "I mean that Karen Whitmore has been committing fraud for 30 years. Her pool is built on land she doesn't own. Her permits were obtained through false applications. She's been bribing city inspectors and filing fraudulent reports. Morrison and Reeves exchanged glances. Those are very serious allegations. Do you have proof? 30 years' worth. Sarah spread the documents across her coffee table. Property deeds, inspection reports, permit applications, even bank records showing payments to city employees. Reeves picked up a document and studied it carefully. Her expression shifted from skepticism to concern. Detective, we may need to expand the scope of this investigation. Outside, Karen's press conference was winding down, but Sarah could see. Her glancing nervously toward the house as more official vehicles arrived. A van from the city inspector's office pulled up, followed by 2 more police cars. Emma grabbed Sarah's arm. Mom, look. On the television screen, the Channel 7 News had cut to breaking coverage. We are getting reports that city inspectors are now on scene at Maple Street, where what started as a neighborhood dispute appears to be evolving into something much larger. Morrison's radio crackled to life. Detective Morrison, we need you. Outside, city inspectors are requesting police presence for a property inspection. Through the window, Sarah watched as city inspectors approached Karen's front door. Karen's composed media facade cracked as she realized the reporters were now filming her house instead of conducting sympathetic interviews. Reeves said. To Sarah, I'm going to need you to come with us. We need to get a formal statement about these documents. Am I under arrest? Not at this time. But this situation is complicated for everyone involved. As they prepared to leave, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Margaret Stevens. Sarah, thank God. Are you watching the news? I'm living the news, Margaret. Listen to me. Carefully. Karen made a mistake. A big one. By going public with this, by calling in the media, she's opened herself up to scrutiny she's been avoiding for decades. The city can't ignore this now, even if they wanted to. Outside, Karen was arguing with a city inspector who was pointing at her pool. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that Karen's composure was finally beginning to crack under the weight of unwanted attention. Sarah, Margaret continued, I just got a call from Tom Henderson. You remember, he used to live next to Karen. Before he moved to Florida? He's been watching the news coverage online. He wants to talk to the investigators about that property sale. Apparently, Karen never told him she was planning to build on the land she bought. Sarah watched as more neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the media circus. The Chens, the Johnsons, the Garcias, all standing in their driveways, watching Karen's perfect world collapse in real time. There's something else, Margaret said. I've been making calls to former city employees, people who retired or moved on to other jobs. 3 of them are willing to go on record about Karen's inappropriate relationships with city officials, gifts, favors, under-the-table payments. Detective Morrison was gesturing for Sarah to join him outside. Margaret, I have to go. But keep making those calls. I think Karen's house of cards is about to fall. As Sarah stepped onto her front porch, she was immediately surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Camera flashes popped like strobe lights, and microphones thrust toward her face like weapons. Mrs. Martinez, how do you respond to allegations of extortion? Is it true you've been harassing your neighbor for over a year? What evidence do you have against Karen Whitmore? Detective Morrison cleared a path through the crowd, guiding Sarah toward his police car. But before they could reach it, a commotion erupted from the direction of Karen's house. You can't do this. Karen's voice carried across the street, loud enough to stop the reporters in their tracks. I have rights. I know people in city government. Sarah turned to see Karen facing off with a city inspector, her perfect composure finally shattered completely. Her hair was disheveled, her blazer wrinkled, and her face was flushed with panic and rage. Please step back, the inspector was saying. We have a legal right to inspect this property based on the complaints filed. What complaints? Who filed complaints? The inspector consulted his clipboard. Actually, we have multiple complaints, some dating back several years. It appears your property has been flagged for violations multiple times, but somehow the inspections were never completed. Karen's face went white. That's impossible. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Morrison called out, approaching her. across the lawn. I need to speak with you about some discrepancies we found in city records. The news cameras swiveled to capture Karen's reaction. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting between the inspector, the detective, and the growing crowd of neighbors and reporters. Then she made a decision that surprised everyone. This is all Sarah Martinez's fault. Karen shouted, pointing an accusatory finger across the street. She's been conducting a vendetta against me for months. She broke into city records. She's been stalking me, photographing my property, conspiring with disgruntled city employees. Sarah stared at Karen across the silent crowd, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. The weight of 30 years of secrets hung in the air like a toxic cloud, threatening to poison everyone it touched. But as she looked at her daughter's frightened face, at the neighbors who had trusted her to fight their battle, at the reporters who would broadcast whatever happened next to the entire city, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She laughed. Not a bitter laugh, or a nervous laugh, but a genuine sound of amusement that cut through the tension like a knife. Every head turned toward her, including Karen's. "You know what's funny, Karen?" Sarah said, stepping forward until she was standing at the edge of her own property, separated from her enemy by nothing but a street and 30 years of accumulated hatred. "You just made the same mistake every bully makes when they're finally cornered. You showed everyone exactly who you really are." Karen's confident expression flickered slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're talking about destroying innocent people to save yourself. You're threatening to ruin families, careers, lives, people who never did anything to you except exist in your neighborhood." Sarah's voice carried clearly across the silent street. "And you're doing it in front of news cameras, with police, and city officials as witnesses." Detective Morrison stepped forward. "Mrs. Martinez has a point, Mrs. Whitmore. What you just described sounds very much like criminal conspiracy and extortion on a massive scale." "I was simply explaining the interconnected nature of community relationships," Karen said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "No," Sarah continued. "You were explaining how you've been running a criminal enterprise for 3 decades. How you've been systematically blackmailing public officials, neighbors, and anyone else who crossed your path. And you did it because you thought it would scare me into backing down." Sarah pulled out her phone and held it up. "But here's what you didn't count on, Karen. I've been recording this entire conversation. Every threat, every admission, every detail about your insurance policy and your mutually assured destruction plan. And thanks to your decision to hold this conversation in front of news cameras, it's all being broadcast live." The color drained from Karen's face as the implications hit her. Around the crowd, people were pulling out their own phones, recording, taking pictures, documenting Karen's public meltdown and admission of systematic blackmail. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "you made one crucial error in your threat about my husband. You assumed I didn't already know about the Anderson project." Emma looked at her mother in surprise, but Sarah kept her focus on Karen. "David told me everything 3 months ago, when we first started getting serious about fighting your harassment campaign. The foundation problems, the covered-up inspection, the questionable campaign contribution, all of it. We've already been working with authorities to make it right. The buyers were compensated, the safety issues were fixed, and David paid significant fines and penalties." Sarah smiled grimly. "You see, Karen, unlike you, when my family makes mistakes, we own up to them and make amends. We don't spend 30 years building blackmail arsenals to protect ourselves." Janet Reeves from the city attorney's office was frantically taking notes. "Mrs. Whitmore, I strongly advise you to remain silent until you can speak with an attorney." But Karen was past listening to advice. The careful facade she'd maintained for decades was crumbling in real time. And Sarah could see the true person underneath, not a community leader or a neighborhood protector, but a paranoid, controlling sociopath who had been systematically terrorizing everyone around her for 30 years. "You think you're so smart." Karen snarled, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "You think you've won something? I still have enough dirt to destroy half this city. I still have the power to—" "No," Sarah interrupted. "You don't. Because power based on fear and blackmail isn't real power. It's just terrorism. And terrorists eventually get stopped." Detective Morrison stepped forward with handcuffs. "Karen." Whitmore, you're under arrest for extortion, conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As Morrison read Karen her rights, Sarah watched the woman who had terrorized her neighborhood for decades finally face the consequences of her actions. Karen's perfect composure was completely gone, replaced by the desperate flailing of someone who had never imagined that her victims might fight back. This isn't over. Karen shouted as Morrison guided her toward the police car. I have contingencies. I have. Her words were cut off as the car door slammed shut. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the vehicle pulled away, carrying Maple Street's self-appointed dictator toward a future that would likely involve prison time and the complete destruction of everything she'd built. As the immediate drama subsided, neighbors began to approach Sarah, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Margaret Stevens was the first to reach her. Sarah, that was incredible. I've never seen anyone stand up to her like that. We all should have done it years ago, Mrs. Chen said, joining the group. I let her intimidate me into changing my garden design, into removing my wind chimes, into making my home less mine. I'm ashamed it took this long. Tom Johnson nodded grimly. She had files on all of us. Pictures, documents, recordings. I saw some of them when she was trying to recruit me for her association. I thought it was just thoroughness. I didn't realize it was blackmail material. More neighbors gathered around, sharing their own stories of Karen's surveillance and intimidation. Sarah listened with growing amazement as she realized just how comprehensive Karen's reign of terror had been. Garden designs, home improvements, children's activities, family gatherings. Nothing had been too small for Karen's scrutiny and control. The question now, Margaret said, is what happens next? Karen's association is dissolved, obviously. But we have a neighborhood to rebuild, relationships to repair, trust to restore. Emma, who had been unusually quiet throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. Maybe we need a real neighborhood association, one that actually brings people together instead of tearing them apart. The suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement from the gathered neighbors. Plans began forming immediately. A block party to celebrate their freedom, a genuine community organization focused on mutual support rather than control, even a neighborhood newsletter that would share good news instead of violations and complaints. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Sarah found herself standing alone with Emma, looking across the street at Karen's empty house. The windows were dark, the perfect lawn suddenly looking sterile and unwelcoming without its guardian to enforce its pristine standards. Mom, Emma said quietly, how did you know she was bluffing about Dad? Sarah smiled sadly. I didn't, completely. But I knew that running away from the truth never solves anything. If David had more problems than he'd admitted, we would have faced them together. That's what families do. And if Karen had actually released all that information about everyone, then we would have dealt with that too. Sometimes you have to take a stand, even when you can't predict all the consequences. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to show them that you're not afraid of them anymore. As they turned to go, back inside, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. Across the neighborhood, porch lights were coming on, not the harsh security lights that Karen had mandated, but warm, welcoming lights that said home rather than fortress. For the first time in months, Maple Street felt like a place where people actually wanted to live. 2 hours later, Sarah was sitting in her kitchen with Detective Morrison and Janet Reeves, providing a detailed statement about Karen's activities when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Martinez? This is Agent Jennifer Walsh with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. We've been monitoring the situation on Maple Street with great interest. Sarah's blood ran cold. The FBI? Yes, Mrs. Whitmore's activities may have extended far beyond neighborhood disputes. We are going to need to conduct a thorough investigation of her records, her financial activities, and her relationships with city officials. Your cooperation would be invaluable. Detective Morrison gestured for Sarah to put the call on speaker. Agent Walsh, this is Detective Morrison with Metro PD. We have Mrs. Whitmore in custody, but she's not talking without an attorney. That's expected. But Detective, we need you to understand something. Based on preliminary evidence, Mrs. Whitmore may have been running one of the most extensive blackmail and corruption networks we've ever encountered at the municipal level. We are talking about potentially hundreds of victims, millions of dollars in bribes and payoffs, and systematic manipulation of city services that may have put public safety at risk. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. Hundreds of victims. Mrs. Whitmore kept meticulous records, Mrs. Martinez. When we searched her house this afternoon, we found filing cabinets full of documentation, photographs, and recorded conversations going back decades. She didn't just target neighbors. She had dirt on city council members, police officers, building inspectors, zoning officials, even judges. Emma, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the kitchen. She really was running. 3 weeks after Karen's arrest, Sarah was floating peacefully in her newly repaired pool when Emma burst through the back door, phone in hand, face pale with shock. "Mom, you need to see this." Karen made bail. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She pulled herself out of the pool, dripping water across the deck as she grabbed the phone. The local news website showed a photograph of Karen walking out of the county courthouse, flanked by an expensive-looking legal team. But it wasn't just any legal team. Sarah recognized the lead attorney as Marcus Blackwood, the city's most notorious defense lawyer, known for representing corrupt politicians and organized crime figures. "How is this possible?" Sarah asked, scrolling through the article. The charges were federal. The bail should have been $2 million, Emma finished. She posted it this morning. In cash. Sarah stared at the screen. Karen Whitmore, suburban neighborhood busybody, had just posted $2 million in cash bail. The implications were staggering. Her phone rang immediately. Agent Walsh's voice was tight with concern. "Mrs. Martinez, I assume you've seen the news. We need to talk." 20 minutes later, Sarah's living room was once again filled with law enforcement officials, but this time the atmosphere was grimmer. Agent Walsh sat across from her with a thick file folder, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Martinez, we've been analyzing Mrs. Whitmore's financial records, and what we found is unprecedented. Over the past 30 years, she's accumulated nearly $15 million through her blackmail operations. We are not talking about a neighborhood busybody anymore. We are talking about someone who built a criminal empire." Detective Morrison leaned forward. The cash for her bail came from offshore accounts we didn't even know existed. Accounts linked to shell companies, fake identities, and money laundering. Operations that span multiple states. "But she's out," Sarah said. "What does that mean for everyone else? For the neighborhood? For my family?" Agent Walsh's expression darkened. "Mrs. Martinez, when someone with Mrs. Whitmore's resources and criminal sophistication makes bail in a case like this, they're usually planning to disappear permanently. But our surveillance suggests she's not running. She's still in the city. Still active. And that's what worries us." Active how? Phone calls to unknown numbers. Meetings with unidentified individuals. Large cash withdrawals from her remaining accessible accounts. Walsh opened her file. "We think she's planning something. Something big enough to justify staying in the country despite facing federal charges." Emma, who had been listening quietly from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward. "What if she's not planning to run? What if she's planning to destroy everything before they can use it against her?" The federal agent looked at Emma with new respect. "Explain." "Well, think about it. She spent 30 years building this network. Right. Collecting secrets, documenting crimes, recording conversations. All of that evidence is now in FBI hands, and it's going to destroy a lot of powerful people. What if Karen's final play isn't to escape justice? What if it's to burn down everyone who ever crossed her?" Agent Walsh and Detective Morrison exchanged worried glances. "You're suggesting she might be planning to release her information publicly? A dead man's switch scenario." "Or worse," Emma continued. "What if she's planning to eliminate the evidence? The old-fashioned way. If you can't run from your problems, sometimes you have to remove the people who can testify against you." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. "Are you saying Karen might try to hurt people?" "Mrs. Martinez," Agent Walsh said carefully, "we are taking all possibilities seriously, which is why we are recommending that you and your family consider protective custody until we can locate Mrs. Whitmore and determine her intentions. Before Sarah could respond, her doorbell rang. Through the front window, she could see a familiar figure standing on her porch, Margaret Stevens, holding what appeared to be a large manila envelope. "It's Margaret," Sarah told the agents. "She's a neighbor." Detective Morrison nodded to Agent Walsh, who moved to the window to observe. Morrison opened the door cautiously. "Margaret, what brings you by?" Margaret's face was grim. "I think you all need to see this. I found it taped to my front door this morning." She held up the envelope. "It's addressed to the entire neighborhood, but it mentions Sarah specifically." Agent Walsh gestured for Margaret to come inside. "Please don't touch the envelope any more than necessary. This could be evidence." Using gloves, Walsh carefully opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper. Her expression grew darker as she read. "What does it say?" Sarah asked. Walsh looked up, her face pale. "It's a manifesto. Mrs. Whitmore is. She's declaring war on everyone who participated in her downfall. She's threatening to systematically destroy the lives of every person who testified against her, every neighbor who turned against her, every official who participated in her arrest." "Let me see it," Sarah demanded. Walsh hesitated, then handed over the document. Sarah's hand shook as she read Karen's precise, formal handwriting asterisk to the residents of Maple Street and all others who betrayed their community obligations. "You believe that my arrest was the end of our relationship. You were mistaken. Justice is not determined by corrupt federal agents and compromised city officials. Justice is determined by those with the will and resources to enforce consequences for betrayal. I spent 30 years protecting this community, maintaining standards, preserving property values, and ensuring that chaos did not consume our peaceful way of life. In return, you conspired against me, violated my privacy, and supported a campaign of harassment led by a vindictive neighbor who refused to accept reasonable community standards. This betrayal will not stand. Over the next 72 hours, each of you will face the consequences of your choices. Sarah Martinez, who initiated this campaign of destruction, will face the most severe consequences. The others will serve as examples of what happens when community bonds are severed by selfishness and spite. That I have resources you cannot imagine. I have information that can destroy careers, families, and lives. I have allies in positions of power who understand the importance of maintaining order. And I have nothing left to lose. Do not attempt to involve law enforcement. They are already compromised. Do not attempt to flee. You will be found. Do not attempt to negotiate. The time for compromise is past. You chose this war. Now you will live with its consequences. K. Whitmore, President, Maple Street Neighborhood. Improvement Association *. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Agent Walsh spoke. "This is essentially a terrorist manifesto. We need to move you all to protective custody immediately." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Absolutely not. Mrs. Martinez, this woman has just threatened to systematically attack everyone in your neighborhood. She has millions of dollars, criminal connections, and nothing to lose. You cannot stay here. And if we run, what happens to everyone else? To the Chens, the Johnsons, the Garcias? To Margaret?" Sarah looked around the room. "Karen is counting on us being afraid. She's counting on us running away and letting her win." Emma stepped beside her mother. "Mom's right. If we disappear into protective custody, Karen gets exactly what she wants, everyone else isolated and defenseless." Margaret nodded vigorously. "The girl's right. We can't abandon the neighborhood now. Not after everything we've been through." Detective Morrison looked exasperated. With all due respect, this isn't about neighborhood solidarity anymore. This is about preventing a potentially violent criminal from harming innocent people." "Then, arrest her," Sarah said simply. "We are trying to find her, but she's not at her house, not at any of her known associates' locations, and she's using cash for everything. Someone with her resources can stay hidden indefinitely." Sarah walked to her front window and looked out at Maple Street. The neighborhood looked peaceful in the afternoon sun, children playing in yards, neighbors tending gardens, normal life continuing despite the threat hanging over them. "Agent Walsh, what if we don't hide from Karen? What if we make her come to us? That's incredibly dangerous. So is spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." Sarah turned back to face the room. Karen's entire power structure was based on fear and isolation. She controlled people by making them believe they were alone, that she was too powerful to fight. But we proved that was wrong. We stood up to her together, and we won. This is different, Mrs. Martinez. She's desperate now. Desperate people do unpredictable things. Exactly. Which means she's also making mistakes. And mistakes can be exploited. Emma caught on immediately. You want to set a trap. I want to give Karen exactly what she's asking for, a final confrontation. But on our terms, with our allies, in our neighborhood. Agent Walsh shook her head. Absolutely not. We cannot use civilians as bait in a federal investigation. You're not using us as bait, Sarah replied. We are volunteering to be bait. There's a difference. Margaret stepped forward. I'm in. Whatever Sarah's planning, count me in. Margaret, you don't even know what I'm thinking yet. Doesn't matter. That woman terrorized us for 30 years. If there's a chance to end this permanently, I'm taking it. Over the next hour, despite vehement protests from both Agent Walsh and Detective Morrison, Sarah outlined her plan. It was risky, potentially DA.